Look, Mom, we're doing this for your own good. How much longer are you going to struggle with Dad's old shop? That era is over now, at that moment. It was as if all sound in the room had ceased. Only my son Javier's voice echoed in my mind. The single sharp clink of the fork in my hand hitting the porcelain plate shattered the silence like glass. At that moment, all eyes turned to me, the center of that shattering, to me, the very wreckage itself. At my own birthday table, I was being cast aside like a worthless object by my only son and his ice queen wife, Valentina. Valentina smiled with feigned patience as she caressed the wine glass on the table with her manicured nails. "Honey, your mother is being overly emotional again," she said. Then she turned directly to me. "Mrs. Sophia, what you need to understand is simple. We have a bright future in Mexico City. Your little nostalgic shop has no place in that picture. Please, don't make this any harder." Not a single word came out of my mouth at that moment, because I had swallowed all those words. All the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the morsels I had denied myself so that my son could be comfortable. I swallowed it all. But inside that lump in my stomach was something they could never guess. The iron will of that shop, whose deed my late husband Ricardo had thrust into my hands, saying, "Sophia, this is your security. I am Sophia Ramirez, a woman who has been breathing for 52 years, dedicating 25 of them to her husband's legacy and her only son. My sole desire throughout my life was their happiness. It turns out my biggest mistake was leaving my own happiness to their mercy." That night, at that table, something inside me died, but I also felt something completely different rising from the ashes. They saw me as a victim, but they were wrong. This story was just beginning, and I would have the last word for. When that last guest left through the door, a tomb-like silence suddenly fell over my house. You know, that deafening emptiness that comes right after the loudest laughter, the happiest moments. That's it. I was standing there in the middle of the living room, on the table, my half-eaten birthday cake, dirty plates, crumpled napkins. Everything looked like the wreckage of a happy family. Javier and Valentina had poured out their poisonous words and then left as if nothing had happened, saying, "We should go now. We still have a long way to go." They didn't care about the destruction they left behind. My eyes fell on the photos on the wall. My late husband Ricardo, me, and little Javier, who at that time still knew the meaning of innocence. What had happened to that little boy smiling at me from that photo? What monster had ripped out that loving little heart that couldn't stay away from his mother's skirt and replaced it with such a cold, calculating stone? 5. A voice inside me said, "Clean up this mess, Sophia, come on." But my hands wouldn't move. It was as if all my strength had been sucked out of me while I was looking into my son's eyes at that table. I walked slowly into the kitchen, feeling as if I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I started loading the dishes into the dishwasher mechanically. Perhaps it was a way to silence my mind, to avoid feeling the bottomless pain in my heart. That's when a small silver baby spoon slipped out from among the dishes and caught my eye. It had a faintly engraved J on it. Javier's baby spoon. I couldn't even remember when or why I had put it there. But when I squeezed that small, cold metal in my palm, the doors of my mind suddenly swung wide open, and I was swept back 20 years to that small, cold winter night. The coldness of that spoon took me back to that night, to the first year after we had just lost Ricardo. Javier was 12 at the time. He was a bright child, sparkling, but his father's absence had closed him in on himself, turning him into a silent shadow. A letter had arrived from school. Javier had qualified for the finals of a statewide math competition. But there was a problem. The finals were in Austin, a 6-hour bus ride away, and would last 3 days. Accommodation, travel expenses, food, and drink. When I added up the numbers in the letter, it was almost double what I earned in a month from my little shop. After Ricardo's death, we were drowning in debt, and I had to account for every penny. It was impossible for me to find that money. That evening at dinner, I was racking my brains trying to figure out how to explain the situation to Javier. He was sitting in his father's old chair, buried in his math book. His face was so serious, so hopeful. I went and sat next to him. I stroked his hair. "Mom," he said without looking up from his book, "you know, if I win this competition, they give scholarships for college. I could become a great engineer, just like my father wanted." At that moment, I saw the enormous dream on the shoulders of that tiny body. He was trying to keep a promise he made to his father. My saying, "We can't, we won't, we don't have the money," wouldn't just mean losing a competition. It would mean killing his father's dream for the second time. I had no right to do that. That night, after Javier fell asleep, I opened the old wooden chest in my bedroom. Inside were a few of my mother's keepsakes and the silver necklace Ricardo had put on me on our wedding day 6. It was delicate, handmade, an elegant piece with small blue stones. Ricardo had worked extra jobs for months to afford it. "This," he whispered in my ear, "is the token of our everlasting love, Sophia." Never take it off. I hadn't taken it off for 14 years. But that night, I did. As the cold silver touched my skin for the last time, I felt as if I were tearing a piece of Ricardo's soul away, but for my son's future, for his hopes, I had to do it. Early the next morning, I went to a junk shop in one of those shady neighborhoods of the city that I never liked. The shop owner was an old man with no trace of mercy in his eyes. With trembling hands, I placed the necklace on the counter. "What will you give me for this?" The man turned the necklace over and over with a magnifying glass. It was as if he was putting a price on my memories, my love for Ricardo. He scowled. "Not much silver, old workmanship. Not worth much, 7. "But it's antique, handmade," I started to say, my voice sounding so helpless. The man laughed mockingly. "Ma'am, I'm not interested in everyone's stories about their old junk. This is my final offer." And he threw a few crumpled bills on the counter. The amount he offered was probably less than a quarter of the necklace's true value, but that money was enough to cover Javier's competition expenses. I closed my eyes. Ricardo's smiling face came to mind, the moment he put the necklace on me. "Forgive me," I whispered to myself. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the man. "Okay," I said. "It's a deal." When I took the money and left that filthy shop, the place where my neck used to be felt like it was burning. I felt empty, naked. But at the same time, there was a strange peace in my heart. I had given up my most precious possession for my son, for his future. When I got home that evening, I put the money in an envelope and tucked it under Javier's pillow. He went to the competition. He didn't win. He came in 3rd. But when he returned, his eyes were shining. For the first time in his life, he had achieved something on his own. At that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. That necklace was much more than a piece of metal. It had bought my son's self-confidence. Now, 20 years later, standing in my kitchen with that baby spoon in my hand, the pain of that moment fell on my heart like a burning ember. I feel that emptiness around my neck much more deeply now. That necklace, the symbol of my love, my sacrifice. Now it adorns someone else's neck, or perhaps it has long since been melted down and turned into something else. Just like that innocent child for whom I sacrificed everything that day, who has now become a selfish man I don't recognize. The helplessness I felt in that junk shop that day seems so innocent compared to the calculating looks I see in my son and his wife's eyes today. It turns out that while I thought I was buying my son's future, I was taking the first step toward my own demise. The price of that silver necklace was my honor. But how could I have known that then, my dear? A mother will do anything for the light in her child's eyes, won't she? I was just a mother. I left the dishes and went back to the living room. The sky was slowly brightening. I hadn't slept a wink all night. Looking out the window, I saw the faded sign of that little shop on the corner, my Burek shop. That place where Ricardo and I had laid every brick with our own hands. That place where we had memories in every corner. That place that Javier and Valentina wanted to sell in a flash, calling it dilapidated. Looking at that sign opened another door in my mind. Javier had become a confident, ambitious young man after that math competition. He had been accepted into the business department of a good university. I was proud of him. But the university environment, with its rich kids driving around in expensive cars, had turned his head. I understand that better now. Back then, I just consoled myself by thinking, he's just making friends. My son is going to be an entrepreneur. One day, at the end of his sophomore year, he came home with a pale face. He was as pale as chalk. He had been acting strange for a week, not answering my calls, constantly acting like he was running away from someone. That night, it all came out. He sat down across from me in the living room. His hands were shaking. "Mom," he said, "I made a huge mistake." My heart was in my mouth. "What happened, son?" "Tell me." It turned out he had fallen for one of his rich friend's promises of a very profitable investment. He had invested a large sum of money in some kind of pyramid scheme, borrowing money from his friends and school. Of course, he never saw the money or that friend again. Now his creditors were at the door, threatening to have him expelled from school and turn him in to the police. The amount of debt was so large that I felt my breath catch when I heard it. There was no way we could have saved that much money in 10 years. "Why did you do this, son?" I asked, crying. "Why didn't you ask me?" He avoided my gaze. "I didn't want to be a burden to you," he mumbled. "I wanted to earn my own money and make you comfortable. I ruined everything." He looked so helpless, so remorseful. In that moment, all my anger, all my disappointment vanished. Standing before me was my little boy again, needing protection. I couldn't leave him in the hands of those sharks. I couldn't let his school life end, his future be decided. The next day, I made the hardest decision of my life. I went to the bank. I applied for a mortgage loan on our shop, our only security, which Ricardo and I had paid off over 20 years. The bank manager was an elderly man who knew Ricardo. "Mrs. Sophia," he said, "are you sure? This is a big risk. This shop is the late Mr. Ricardo's legacy to you. What if you can't pay back the loan?" I answered without taking my eyes off him. "That shop is Ricardo's legacy to me, yes, but Javier is also the most precious legacy we have in this life. I have to take this risk for my son's future." I got the loan. I paid off all of Javier's debts one by one. He seemed to relax, as if a ton of weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He hugged me and thanked me repeatedly. "Mom, I swear to you," he said that day. "As soon as I finish school, I'll work and pay you back every penny. I'll save this shop, my father's legacy, from that bank. I promise." You know what? I believed him. I believed him so much that I practically turned my life into hell for the next 5 years. I would get up at 5 in the morning to open the shop. I would work alone until midnight. To earn extra money, I started cooking for neighborhood events and weddings. During those 5 years, I didn't buy myself a single new dress. I never went out for coffee with my friends, not even once. I put every penny I earned straight into that damn bank loan. My hands got calloused, my back ached, and I had bags under my eyes. But every month when I paid that installment, I told myself, "Almost there, Sophia, you're going to make it." Because I believed I wasn't just paying off a debt, I was saving my son's promise to me, his honor. And after 5 years, I paid the final installment of that debt. That day, when I left the bank and held the deed to the shop in my hands again, I felt like I had been reborn. I had succeeded. I had kept Ricardo's trust. I had saved my son's future. That evening, I called Javier, who had long since graduated and started working at a large company. He and Valentina were just getting to know each other at the time. "Son," I said happily on the phone, "the debt is paid off. I saved our shop." I'll never forget that brief silence on the phone. Then he said, "You're amazing, Mom. Congratulations." "I'm so happy." His voice was so emotionless, so distant. It was as if he were giving good news to a passing acquaintance. "No, thank you, Mom, for all the hardships you went through because of me. No, I forgot my promise. I'm sorry." Nothing. I should have realized then, shouldn't I? I should have realized then that my sacrifice had long since become just another motherly duty in his eyes. But I didn't realize it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Now, looking at the brightening sky and the sign of that old shop, I realize how pointless those 5 years of hell were. While I was mortgaging my own life to save his future, he hadn't even made room for me in those future plans. That shop, for him, it's just a property to be sold and turned into cash. But for me, it's not just a building, dear. It's my youth, my love for my husband, my sleepless nights, my calloused hands, every drop of sweat I shed for my son. It's a part of my soul, and they're trying to sell my soul. That day, I told the bank manager, "I have to take this risk for my son's future." What a fool I was. It turns out that day, I didn't save my son's future. I just cleared the obstacles in front of him so he could dispose of me more easily. I stepped away from the window. I took one last look at the mess in the living room. That wreckage was no longer my wreckage. It was wreckage they had created, and they would pay the price. The deep pain inside me turned into a strange calmness and cold determination born from the ashes of those memories. The era of sacrifice was over, Sophia. Now was the time for justice. I slowly walked toward the phone. The first person I would call would be Ricardo's old friend, lawyer Hernandez. This battle was just beginning. Exactly 3 days had passed since that birthday night, my dear. For 3 days, neither my phone rang nor my doorbell. It was as if what had happened at that table, those cruel words, had left no trace in the lives of my only son and his wife. But inside me, those 3 days felt like 3 centuries. I wandered around the house like a ghost, hearing the echoes of their betrayal in every corner. Sleep wouldn't come to my eyes at night. Whenever I drifted off, Valentina's condescending smile and Javier's cowardly glances, which he stole from me, appeared in my mind. Then, at the end of that night, the faint fire of anger that had awakened inside me would reignite. At the end of those long nights, when my sacrifices and tears flashed before my eyes like a film reel, I made a decision with the first light of dawn. Crying and feeling sorry for myself would get me nowhere. They may have chosen me as their victim, but I refused to play that role. My heart was pounding as I picked up the phone. I found a name in my contacts I hadn't called in years. Attorney Hernandez. Ricardo's old friend, my wedding witness. We hadn't seen each other in years, but Ricardo always said, "If you ever get into trouble, the first name that should come to mind is Guillermo Hernandez, Sophia. He's one of the few men who knows what honor means." My trembling finger pressed the call button. The moment I heard that deep, reassuring voice on the other end of the line, a lump formed in my throat. "Guillermo?" "It's me, Sophia. Sophia Ramirez." After a moment of silence, I sensed the warm surprise in his voice. "Sophia, my dear, it's been so long. How wonderful to hear your voice. But I'm afraid this isn't a holiday call, is it?" Unable to hold back the tears streaming from my eyes, I told him everything, starting from that night, without leaving out a single detail. Javier and Valentina's plans, how they treated me, their intention to sell the shop. Guillermo didn't interrupt me once while I was talking. He listened patiently, with the tenderness of a father listening to his daughter. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Oh, Sophia, oh." Ricardo would be devastated if he saw this. But listen to me. Stop crying and focus on what I'm about to say. The deed to that shop is entirely in your name, isn't it? I remember Ricardo leaving it to you as a guarantee. Yes, I said between sobs. Only in my name. Good, said Guillermo. That means we have a very strong legal hand. Without your signature, they can't hammer a single nail into that shop. They can't move a single brick. I'll send them a formal notice immediately. I'll inform them that you are the sole owner of the property and that any harassment or pressure in this regard will have legal consequences. A momentary sense of relief washed over me. It was as if I had seen a tiny light at the end of a dark tunnel. Really, Guillermo? So, can we stop them? Guillermo's voice became serious. We can, Sophia. The law is on our side, but I'll be honest with you. That's the easy part. The hard part starts now. From what I know, Javier is a stubborn kid, and that Valentina woman you mentioned is clearly dangerous. They know the legal process moves slowly. They won't stop until they wear you down, until they break you psychologically. They'll slander you, harass you, try to humiliate you in public. You need to be prepared for the worst. This won't just be a legal battle, Sophia. It will be a war of nerves. And you, how strong can you remain? Guillermo's final question rang like a bell in my head for weeks afterward. How strong could I remain? The determination I felt at the beginning, that first glimmer of hope, began to fade a little more each day with the relentless war of attrition that Javier and Valentina had started, pulling me into a bottomless pit of despair. A week had passed since Attorney Hernandez sent the letter of demand. No one called or asked about me during that week. Unaware that this silence was the calm before the storm, I interpreted it as a kind of retreat and felt somewhat relieved. Every morning, I opened my shop, made my pastries, and tried to heal my wounds by chatting with my customers. That shop was my refuge. It was the only place where Ricardo's spirit still lived, where our happiness had permeated the walls. The people in the neighborhood, my neighbors, my customers, they were my second family. Those who heard about the terrible incident on my birthday came to support me, trying to comfort me by saying, "Don't worry, Sophia, they're just kids, they're young." In those moments, I felt I wasn't alone, but how wrong I was. It turned out that I would suffer the biggest blow in the place where I felt safest. That day was a busy Saturday afternoon, as usual. The shop was packed. As I was preparing orders behind the counter, I sensed the expensive perfume scent wafting in with the opening of the door, followed immediately by the icy air. When I looked up, I saw them. Valentina stood tall, wearing a pure white dress that seemed to insult the dust and dirt of our neighborhood, with a trendy bag on her arm. Next to her stood Javier, looking guilty and unhappy, as if he had been dragged there against his will. For a moment, all sound ceased. Everyone in the shop dropped their forks and knives and stared at them. Valentina put on her most fake, most pained smile. In a loud voice that everyone could hear, she called out, "Mommy!" "We came to see you." "You look so tired." I came out from behind the counter. I didn't even have time to take off my apron. I clasped my hands behind my back, not knowing what to do with them. "What are you doing here?" I managed to whisper. Valentina, as if she hadn't heard my question, pointed to a spot on the floor with her finger. "Oh my God, Javier, look, the floors are so dirty. Mommy, you can't handle all this work on your own at your age. How many times have we told you to hire help?" Her voice was so full of fake concern that I felt sick to my stomach. The customers in the shop were watching us with curious eyes. I even thought I saw a cloud of suspicion on the face of Rosita, my 40-year-old neighbor, sitting at the next table. Valentina was determined to use this silence and these curious glances as a stage. She slowly walked over to Aunt Rosita's table. "Hello, Auntie. You must be my mother's neighbor," she said in that poisonously sweet voice. "That's why we're trying to convince her. We can't bear to see your mother so tired. Javier and I thought that if we sold this shop, we could put your mother in a wonderful nursing home by the sea, where she would be well cared for with a doctor and nurses. But she's so attached to her memories that she won't accept our kind offer. Old age, what can you do?" At that moment, it was like boiling water was poured over my head. You know, those words were like a bullet. Nursing home, old age, attached to her memories. At that moment, there, in my own shop, in the eyes of my neighbors, I was being turned into a grumpy old woman who was not of sound mind and who rejected her children's kindness. My honor, my reputation, that shop was being trampled underfoot. The expression on Aunt Rosita's face had changed. Curiosity had now given way to pity, and pity is even more humiliating than anger. I looked at Javier. I was begging him with my eyes. "Say something," I was saying inside. "Say it's a lie. Say what a cruel slander it is." But he was just looking at the floor. While his mother's honor was being crushed under his wife's whims, he was buried in a cowardly silence. Valentina stood in the middle of the shop like a commander declaring victory. "Well, we just said we'd stop by. Still, think about our offer, Mommy dear. It's all for your own good." Then she took Javier's arm, and they left, just as they had come, leaving behind that poisonous silence and my shattered pride, without a care. After they left, a deathly silence fell over the shop. No one said a word. I could feel the pity in everyone's eyes. It was as if I was no longer Sophia, the strong, independent woman of the neighborhood, but a pitiful woman, unwanted by her children, destined for a nursing home. That day, I closed the shutters before the lunch service ended. Inside, in the dark, I sat in front of Ricardo's picture on the wall and cried for hours. Despair began right then, because I understood that they were trying to take away not just my shop, but who I was, my entire reputation. And worst of all, they were doing it in front of the people I trusted most, my neighbors whom I considered family. My refuge was no longer my refuge. That day, in my own home, in my own neighborhood, I became a stranger. After that shameful day, I shut myself away completely. I didn't open the shop for several days. I didn't answer the phone. It was as if all my energy had been sucked out of me. I lay in my bed in the fetal position, staring at the ceiling. Attorney Hernandez's warning echoed in my mind. This is going to be a war of nerves. And I felt like I had already been defeated in the very first skirmish of that war. I had seen how far they were willing to go, how cruel they could be, and that terrified me. One evening, the doorbell rang. I didn't want to answer it, but it rang so insistently that I finally gave in and went to the door with weary steps. It was Javier. This time he was alone. His face bore that look of guilt I had seen in the shop that day. For a moment, a foolish hope arose in me. Maybe he had come to apologize. Maybe he had realized what a terrible thing his wife had done. "Mom, can we talk?" he said. I let him in. The living room was dark. I hadn't even bothered to turn on the lights. He didn't say anything either, just sat down on the couch in the middle of the darkness. "About that day," he began. "Valentina, she's a bit tactless, you know. She didn't mean it." "What didn't she mean, Javier?" I said in an icy voice. "Didn't she mean to make me look like a senile, helpless woman in front of the whole neighborhood? Didn't she mean to threaten to put me in a nursing home? Which one didn't she mean?" He swallowed. "Mom, she's just thinking about our future. She wants what's best for US. Us?" I asked. "Am I included in that us, Javier? Or am I just an obstacle to that bright future?" He stood up and came over to me. This time his tactic was different. This time his weapon wasn't anger or contempt, but fake affection and manipulation. He was holding an old photo album. Our old album. He placed it on the table and began flipping through the pages. "Look, Mom," he said. "You and Dad. The day the shop opened. How happy you were." My eyes filled with tears. I turned my head away to avoid looking at the photo, but he was determined to probe my deepest wound like a ruthless surgeon. "Dad always looked forward, didn't he?" he continued. "He never got stuck in the past. He always wanted something better, something new. The same for me. Our son will have a better life than us, Sophia," he always said to you. "He won't have to go through the hardships we did. Do you remember?" Each word was like a shard of glass piercing my heart. He was using his father's memory, his words, as a weapon against me. He was taking Ricardo's love for me, my loyalty to him, and selling it back to me as my stubbornness, my selfishness. "I'm just trying to fulfill my father's will, Mom. I'm trying to make his dream come true. If he were alive, he would have supported my idea of selling this shop and starting a bigger business all the way. He would be on my side. You are the one going against his memory. By clinging to this old shop like a fetish, you are hurting his forward-thinking spirit." "Dilapidated?" I whispered. "You call that place, where every brick holds your father's sweat, dilapidated?" "Yes, dilapidated," she said, raising her voice, "because it is now. Times have changed. Even my father would understand that. You're the only one who doesn't." At that moment, I felt something snap. This was worse than the public humiliation in the shop. It was an attack on my public honor. This was a violation of my most sacred memories, my love for Ricardo, his legacy. He was accusing me of betraying the man I loved. He was accusing me of being an obstacle to his dreams. All my sacrifices, that silver necklace, those 5 years of servitude, all of it had lost its meaning in his eyes because of my selfishness. I looked at him through my tears. "How could you do this?" I asked. "How could you make your father turn in his grave? How could you use his name for your dirty schemes?" Right then, in my most vulnerable, most fragile moment, he delivered the final blow. He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was a folded document. He placed it in front of me. "Mom," he said, his voice suddenly reverting to that pleading, manipulative tone. "Forget the lawyers. Forget the courts. We're a family. Let's settle this between ourselves. It's just a simple power of attorney for the sale. Sign this, and we'll give you a decent share of the proceeds from the sale of the shop. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. You won't need anyone. Come on, Mom. Don't do this. Don't tear our family apart anymore." At that moment, I looked at that paper and at my son's face, and I saw neither regret nor love in his eyes. I saw only the cold determination of a hunter striving to reach his goal. He had struck me at my most sacred values, emotionally demolished me, and right there in the middle of that wreckage, he was offering me a poisonous deal. At that moment, I realized my son was gone. This stranger standing before me was not my son. I flung the paper to the floor with the back of my hand. "Get out!" I shouted with all the strength in my lungs. "Get out of this house! Get out of my life! Don't you ever show your face to me again!" Javier was taken aback by this unexpected reaction. Then the fake mask on his face fell away, replaced by icy fury. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You'll regret this very much." And he slammed the door and left. I collapsed on the floor behind him. For hours, maybe days, I lay there in that dark hall, staring at the power of attorney document on the floor and crying. It was the depths of despair. I was surrounded not only by my enemies but also by my own son, whom I loved more than life itself. I had been attacked both in public and in the privacy of my own home. I had no strength left to fight. Guillermo was right. This was a war of nerves, and my nerves had finally snapped. That night, I came to the brink of giving up, of leaving everything behind. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a stubborn old woman stuck in the past. Maybe I should have sold everything and waited quietly in a corner to die. At that moment, for the first time in my life, I thought of death as a release. The days after that night passed in a kind of limbo. I was neither living nor dying. I was just breathing. The shop was still closed. I didn't step outside the house. The curtains were always closed. I didn't even answer Attorney Hernandez's calls. The warrior spirit inside me had died, replaced by a wreck that had given up on everything, accepted defeat. Somewhere deep in my soul, I was waiting for Javier and Valentina's next move. But nothing happened. This silence was even more terrifying than the previous storms. One morning, I woke up with an urge I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the first time in weeks that I felt something inside me. Longing. I missed Ricardo. I missed his scent, his calm strength, his presence. At that moment, I felt the need to touch the thing that brought me closest to him. It was my secret treasure, one that couldn't be measured in money, one that no one knew about. Ricardo's recipe book. This was no ordinary notebook. It was the founding manifesto of our shop. Years before opening the shop, Ricardo had started writing down the recipes he learned from his mother, his own experiments, his dreams in that old, leather-bound notebook. Each page bore his handwriting, little notes scribbled in the margins, sometimes even flour and oil stains. That notebook was our whole life. It was the soul of the shop. After Ricardo died, I hid that notebook in a place no one could touch, a secret compartment in the wall behind the old flour sacks in the shop, a place only I knew about. It was my most sacred heirloom. I threw something on quickly and left the house. For the first time in years, I was going to the shop so reluctantly, so fearfully. It was as if it was no longer my sanctuary, but enemy territory. My hands trembled as I opened the shutter. I went inside and locked the door behind me. The smell of dust and stale dough stung my nostrils. Everything was just as I had left it, silent, cold, and soulless. My steps led me straight to that secret compartment. I pulled aside the old sacks of flour. I loosened the loose brick in the wall. I felt the empty space inside with my hand. It was empty. For a moment, I thought my heart had stopped. No, it couldn't be. Maybe I had put it in the wrong place. Maybe I couldn't find it because I was too excited. Again, and again, and again, I put my hand in that empty space. But it was useless. The notebook wasn't there. In a wild panic, I started turning the shop upside down. I emptied the drawers, ransacked the cupboards, looked under the counter, on top of the tables. I looked everywhere, but it wasn't there. Ricardo's spirit seemed to have been stolen from that shop. Just as I was about to collapse in despair, a white, folded piece of paper on the counter caught my eye. I didn't know how it got there, how I hadn't seen it before. With trembling hands, I picked up the paper and unfolded it. On it were a few lines written in a cold, flawless handwriting, like pearls. It was Valentina's handwriting. "Mrs. Sophia," the note began, "it felt wonderful to burn that old germ-ridden notebook in the fireplace at home, you can't imagine. Watching the flames lick those yellowed pages, I saw how relieved Javier was. A brand new, sparkling beginning will emerge from the ashes. You see, I'm helping Javier get rid of those unnecessary heavy burdens he's been carrying on his shoulders from the past. You should try it too. Getting stuck in the past only ROTSU. Love, Valentina." That moment, the moment I read that note, time stopped. I couldn't breathe. My vision went dark, my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold stone floor of the shop. This wasn't betrayal. This wasn't humiliation. This was murder. They had killed my husband a second time. They had taken his memory, his spirit, his only tangible trace in this world, and turned it into nothingness, into ashes. And they had done it just to hurt me, just to completely break my resistance. It had nothing to do with money, property, or anything else. It was pure, unadulterated, diabolical evil. My sobs echoed off the empty walls of the shop like the sounds of a drowning animal. I rolled on the floor, pounding the ground with my fists. The pain I felt in that moment was even deeper than the pain I felt the day I buried Ricardo. Back then, at least I had memories. I had a notebook I could touch, lines I could read. Now, all I had left was a handful of imaginary ashes. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But at some point, my tears dried up. The woman inside me who was screaming and suffering fell silent. And in her place, something I had never known before settled in. Something cold, calm, and terrifying. Slowly, I got up from the floor. I stood up. I straightened my clothes. I went behind the counter and washed my face at the sink. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, yes. But there was no longer any pain or despair in them. They were empty, emotionless and calm, like the sky after a storm. And in that moment, I understood. They weren't fighting me over property. They weren't bargaining with me. They were trying to destroy my soul, to erase me from this world. What was burning in that fireplace wasn't just a leather-bound notebook. What was burning in that fireplace was my mercy. It was that sliver of forgiveness still somewhere inside me. What was burning in that fireplace was that last foolish, last motherly voice whispering in my ear at night. But no matter what, he's your son, your flesh and blood. That voice was gone now. They had burned it too. They had started a war. They had fired the first shot by throwing Ricardo's soul into the fire. But there was something they didn't know, something they would never understand. If you strike a mother, a wife, at her most sacred memories, at her most vulnerable place, you don't kill her. You turn her into a monster. You extinguish all the goodness, all the love, all the light inside her, and in its place, you light a dark and cold fire that burns with only one purpose. Sofia Ramirez died that morning on the cold floor of the shop she loved so much. She turned to ashes along with her husband's ashes. But a completely different woman was born from those ashes. A woman with no tears or fear in her eyes. A woman with no love or mercy in her heart. A woman with only one word in her mind. Her name was revenge. The ghost of Ricardo's charred recipe book had seeped into every corner of my soul. The woman who was born in place of the old Sophia who died inside me after those long hours spent crying on the cold floor of that shop did not know how to cry. The only thing she felt was an icy rage coursing through her veins, hardening every cell of her body with each passing moment. I no longer asked questions or hesitated. I simply knew what had to be done. The next morning, when I went to Attorney Hernandez's office, the expression on the face of the old, kind man who greeted me at the door changed. I think he saw that new, frightening emptiness in my eyes. He didn't try to comfort me as he usually did. He just sat down at his desk, clasped his hands in front of him, and like a patient's relative asking a doctor for a diagnosis, he said, "Tell me, Sophia, what happened?" I told him about Valentina's note. The notebook turned to ashes, the memories destroyed. As I spoke, the professional calm on Guillermo's face faded, replaced by pure anger. Ricardo was his closest friend. This attack had been directed at him too. "I understand," he said finally, his voice low but sharp. "I understand. The time for defense is over, Sophia. Now is the time to attack." That was the moment the first seeds of my plan for revenge were sown. But my dear, if only everything had been as clear and simple as it was at that moment. The days and weeks that followed that moment of cold determination were the scene of the most difficult, most grueling internal battle of my life. Because they say that to fight a monster, you have to become a monster yourself. But no one tells you how painful that transformation is, how much of your own soul you have to sacrifice. Revenge may be a cold dish, but while you're preparing it, you have to freeze your own heart in that ice. Guillermo and I had begun to sketch out the main points of the plan: legal strategies, financial maneuvers, steps to take. Everything looked logical and correct on paper, but whenever I left the office and returned to the loneliness of my home, the terrible reality behind those letters on the paper hit me like a slap in the face. I was making a plan to destroy my own son, my own flesh and blood. The first step of the plan was to investigate Javier's financial history. Guillermo had hired a private investigator to uncover the details of that pyramid scheme I had paid off, his university expenses, and the debts that had accumulated on his credit cards after he met Valentina. One evening, Guillermo called me and said he had emailed me a file containing the investigator's initial findings. I sat down at my computer and opened the file. Numbers, dates, statements. The harsh realities showing how recklessly Javier had spent money and how Valentina had dragged him into a debt trap were pouring out onto my screen one by one. This was one of the biggest trump cards we could use against them. It was evidence that would destroy their image of a successful and bright future. But as I looked at those numbers, I felt not triumph, but a deep sense of shame and pain. Hesitation. This was my son, whom I had kept awake at night baking pastries to put through school, whose every need I had put before my own desires. I had sacrificed myself to save his honor, his future, and now I was preparing to expose all his mistakes, all his secrets, in a courtroom or, worse, before the eyes of the whole world. Could this be right? Could a mother do this? A voice inside me, the voice of that old, tired Sophia, whispered, "Am I doing the wrong thing? Whatever happens, he is your child. You brought him into this world. Do you have the right to throw him away like this?" At that moment, the cool-headed woman in Guillermo's office was gone, replaced by the same conflicted, heartbroken mother. I shut down the computer. It was betrayal. What I was doing was also a kind of betrayal. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, tormented by my conscience. Early in the morning, unable to bear it, I got up and went up to the attic. There, among the old belongings, was a box containing Javier's childhood things. When I opened the box, memories flooded my nose along with the smell of mothballs. On top was a yellowed piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a Mother's Day card Javier had made for me when he was 7. A clumsily drawn flower, the words, "My dearest mom," written backwards, and in the middle, 2 stick figures holding hands. That was us. Underneath, it said, "I love you more than anyone else in the world." At that moment, it was as if the ghost of that little innocent child came and sat in front of me. I ran my finger over that drawing. I remembered his tiny hand, how he held my hand so tightly, how he ran crying into my arms when he fell in the park, how I stayed by his side all night when he had a fever, how he fell asleep to the stories I told him. Where had that child gone, that pure, loving child? How had he turned into the monster standing before me? My tears began to fall onto that 20-year-old card. I couldn't betray this child, this memory. I pressed the card to my chest. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't destroy my son." In that moment, the plan for revenge, all that anger, seemed meaningless and empty. There was only the endless pain of a mother who had lost her son. Right at that breaking point, swept up in that wave of mercy, I heard something drop into the mailbox. Curious, I went downstairs. A fancy envelope had been slipped under the door. It bore the logo of a large law firm I didn't recognize. I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal notice sent by Javier and Valentina's lawyer. But this was not a simple notice like the one Guillermo had sent. This was a declaration of war. The letter stated that my clients expressed their deep concern that I could not make financial decisions on my own due to my advanced age and volatile mood. They implied that my blocking the sale of the shop was proof that I was mentally unstable. Going even further, they stated that if I continued with this stubborn and unreasonable behavior, they would go to court to have a guardian appointed on my behalf. And the final blow: our client's sole desire is to ensure that their mother lives in peace, placed in a reputable institution where she can receive the professional care she needs. At that moment, I still had that innocent Mother's Day card in my hand. On one side, the clumsy drawing of that little boy who said he loved me more than anything in the world. On the other, the cold, formal words of that adult man's lawyer who treated me like a madman and threatened to lock me up in a mental hospital or nursing home. At that moment, the fountain of mercy inside me dried up instantly. Instead, a rage more pure and more burning than I had ever felt before surged up. What they were burning in that fireplace wasn't just his father's notebook. Now they were trying to burn my son's innocent memory. They were daring to use that memory as a weapon against me. I slowly placed the card on the table. It was no longer a loving memory, but proof of murdered innocence. That little boy was dead, and his killer was the man I would take revenge on. After that threatening letter, all my doubts vanished. I no longer lay awake at night tormented by my conscience, but thinking about the details of my revenge plan. Guillermo and I talked every day, refining the plan to perfection. We knew Javier was drowning in debt and that Valentina desperately needed money to maintain her luxurious lifestyle. The plan was simple. We would offer them bait they couldn't refuse. But when they swallowed the hook on the end of that bait, they would learn a lesson they would never forget. The plan was based on exploiting their pride and greed. The goal wasn't just to save the shop. The goal was to publicly destroy their false image of success, their dreams of a bright future, right in the middle of the social circle they boasted about most. The details of the plan excited me. But sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, the ghost of the old Sophia would reappear. One afternoon, we were in Guillermo's office. In front of us lay Javier's university yearbook. The researcher was examining his social circle and connections from that period. As I flipped through the pages, a photo caught my eye. Javier's graduation ceremony, taken as he tossed his cap into the air with that proud, hopeful smile. I was next to him. My face showed the expression of the greatest pride and happiness a mother could feel for her child. Looking at that photo, I was transported back to that day. That day, when I saw Javier walking up to the podium in his gown, I thought about how all the hardships I had endured and all the sacrifices I had made were worth it. I whispered to Ricardo in my heart, "Look, Ricardo, our son did it. He made your dream come true. He was my victory. He was my creation. Now, however, I was preparing to destroy that creation with my own hands. I would use this photo, his proud smile, as evidence against him. Look, I would say to the world, this young man who looks so bright and shining is actually a fraud, an ungrateful person. I was going to destroy the monument of pride I had created with my own hands. With my own hands. This was contrary to the nature of motherhood. A mother protects, cares for, and stands behind her child no matter what. I, however, had turned into a hunter, lying in wait for him. That agonizing doubt began to gnaw at me again. When I returned home that evening, my mind was in turmoil. I felt exhausted and defeated. I turned on the TV, mindlessly flipping through the channels. Then I started scrolling through social media just to distract myself. I knew Valentina's profile was public. Giving in to my curiosity, I went to her page. What I saw stunned me. Valentina had shared a new photo 10 minutes earlier. She and Javier were in front of a baby store. Javier was holding a tiny baby booty in his hand. Valentina's hand was on her belly, which was starting to show. Under the photo, it said, "We're ready for the biggest adventure of our lives." The Ramirez family is growing. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. At that moment, my world came crashing down. I was going to have a grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. At that moment, all those plans, all that anger, vanished into thin air. The only thing on my mind was that tiny, innocent being. What had that baby done wrong? Would it have to bear the sins of its father and mother? Was I going to break up my own grandchild's family? Was I going to cause it to grow up under the wreckage of a broken family? Maybe this was a sign. Maybe this baby was a chance to bring our family back together. Maybe I should forget everything and turn over a new leaf for that innocent baby. With tears streaming down my face, I found Guillermo's number on my phone. I was going to call him and tell him I was canceling everything. Just as I was about to press the call button, my finger froze. On Valentina's page, right below the baby news, there was another photo she had shared the day before. I don't know how I hadn't noticed that photo before. In the photo, Valentina and Javier were posing in front of a shiny red sports car, the latest model. The car looked so expensive that they couldn't afford it even if they sold my shop. But what really froze my blood was the caption under the photo. "Keep investing in the future. We're getting rid of everything old and unnecessary and embracing the new life we deserve. Some sacrifices must be made." Number New Beginnings. Number Mexico City. Life number Power. At that moment, a lightning bolt struck my mind. Get rid of everything old and unnecessary. Some sacrifices must be made. These words weren't meant for the car. They were meant for me and my shop. They were for Ricardo's legacy, that burned notebook. Even before they sold the shop, they had already begun to enjoy the bloody fortune they had built on my life. The baby news. Even that was probably part of the plan. It was another manipulation they used to soften me up, to make me give in. At that moment, I realized that even that innocent baby was not a goal in their eyes, but a tool. The phone in my hand almost fell to the ground. That last shred of mercy inside me was crushed and destroyed under the arrogant smiles reflected off the shiny hood of that sports car. At that moment, I thought of my grandchild, but in a different way. I thought of that innocent child who would grow up in the hands of these monsters. I had a responsibility to him. I had to save him before he turned into a heartless, materialistic monster like his mother and father. And there was only one way to do that, to teach them, in a way they would never forget, that money and power aren't everything, that honor and family matter. At that moment, I completely abandoned the idea of calling Guillermo. There was no more hesitation, only an iron will and a plan waiting to be executed flawlessly. The battle inside me was over. All the tides in my soul had calmed. I was no longer a stormy sea, but an icy river, locked onto its target, not a single drop straying from its course. When Guillermo and I met for the last time, I told him about this new determination in my eyes. He nodded. The talking was over. It was time for action. At the heart of our plan was the secret trump card I had held from the very beginning, the deed to the shop. But Guillermo's genius was to use this card not just as a shield, but as a sword. The plan was not to draw them into defense, but to get them to come of their own accord to a square we had set up, to a guillotine of our own choosing. Guillermo knew a businessman named Ricardo, retired but still highly respected in the market. Ricardo agreed to help us, both in memory of his old friend and out of anger at the injustice in my story. The plan was this. Ricardo and a colleague we would present as his young, ambitious lawyer would appear as buyers acting on behalf of a large, Monterrey-based investment fund. This fake investment fund would approach Javier and Valentina not directly, but through their lawyer. This would make the deal more official and credible. Their offer would be, quite literally, mind-boggling. They would fabricate the lie that the area where the shop was located would soon undergo a major urban transformation and that the corner would be the center of a new luxury housing project. Therefore, they would offer 3 times the value of the shop. This amount would be more than enough to cover all of Javier's debts and allow Valentina to start the luxurious life she dreamed of. It was bait thrown at their greed, something they could never resist. Once they got over the shock of the offer, they would move on to the bargaining stage. Ricardo, the fake investor, would play the tough guy, but there would be one condition. He would want to announce this major investment and project at a grand party in one of Mexico City's most elegant hotels, inviting the press and important figures from the business world. This was the pinnacle of Valentina's dreams. It was her chance to declare her victory in front of the elite circle she so desired. She would do anything to organize that party. The investment fund would cover all the expenses for this party. The signing ceremony would take place right in the middle of this party, on a special stage set up for the occasion. They would walk onto that stage thinking they were signing the biggest victory of their lives. But in reality, they would be signing their own public execution warrants. Throughout this process, the fake buyers would constantly increase the pressure on Javier. "This deal won't happen without your mother's signature," they would say. "We can't let such a great opportunity slip away because of an old woman's stubbornness. Either you convince her, or we walk away from the table." I knew that Javier, crushed under the pressure of Valentina and his own dreams, would try everything to get me to sign. Threats, pleas, fake tears. And when that moment came, I would set aside all the pain and anger I had been holding inside for months and play my part. I would play the defeated, resigned, helpless mother. "Fine," I would say. "I'm tired now." "Do whatever you want. I would agree to sign that document, at that party, in front of everyone." I would give them the feeling that victory was within reach. The plan was ready. Every detail, every possible scenario had been thought through. While Guillermo prepared the legal documents, Ricardo had assembled his own team. I, meanwhile, was making my own preparations. I was no longer that woman who mourned, shut away in her home. I went to the best store in town. I chose the armor I would wear that night. It was a black dress, powerful, elegant, but with equally sharp lines. I went to the hairdresser and had my hair cut. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I no longer saw Javier's mother Sofia, but a stranger who had come to settle the score with him. The date for the party had been set. 2 weeks later, their night of victory would be my day of justice. I felt neither fear nor hesitation, only the cold, patient weight of a hunter who had cornered his prey. While they popped champagne and posed for cameras with fake smiles, I would wait for the moment when they would learn the biggest lesson of their lives. When I sat down at that signing table, I would sign not just a piece of paper, but their rotten, arrogant world, and that signature would be the end of them, not me. The 2 weeks leading up to that night were like a dream, my dear. But not a sweet dream, a dream of cold reality, every detail calculated, every gesture rehearsed. All my life I had played roles for others, the self-sacrificing mother, the faithful wife, the hard-working shopkeeper. But now I was preparing for the biggest role of my life, victim. I had truly been a victim for so long that now, playing that role felt both ironic and painfully easy. Every time Javier called, I would tremble, whisper, "I'm tired now," pretending to give up in feigned helplessness. I didn't even respond to Valentina's insolent messages saying, "Congratulations, Mommy, you made the right decision." I let them be, let them drown in their own triumphalism, their own arrogance. I let them decorate their own guillotines with their own hands, with joy. And finally, that night came. The night of reckoning, the night of justice. When I got out of the car at the door of one of Mexico City's most luxurious hotels, my breath caught for a moment. I had never seen such a glittering, such a magnificent place in my life. Huge crystal chandeliers, gold leaf on the ceiling, people walking on marble floors, reeking of wealth. This was not my world. This was Valentina's dream, and I was there to turn that dream into a nightmare. I wore the black, simple but sharply tailored dress I had bought especially for that night. It wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was my armor. My hair was pulled back to reveal my face. For the first time in months, my face showed determination, not pain. As I entered the hotel, I didn't feel like a stranger for a moment amid all the glitz and glamour, because I wasn't there as a guest, but as a hunter, and this was my hunting ground. Standing at the door of the ballroom and looking inside, I saw them, the king and queen of the night. Javier, in an expensive tuxedo, looked handsome as always, but tense. His eyes were constantly on the door, waiting for his fake investors, his saviors. Valentina, meanwhile, was trying to shine like a star in a glittering, exaggerated dress that didn't quite fit her. Champagne glass in hand, she laughed at the people surrounding her, people who looked as fake as she did. Seeing them like that, I felt a momentary pang of pity. How pathetic they were. Two poor souls who had sold their souls and their families to achieve this fake glamour, this rented luxury. But then I remembered Ricardo's burnt notebook, and that last shred of mercy in me froze. When they saw me, a look of relief appeared on their faces. They came over to me. Valentina looked me up and down with a condescending gaze. "Oh, Mommy, you're here," she said with that fake sweetness. "Black suits you so well, just as you're saying goodbye to your old boring life." I smiled, but it wasn't my old warm smile. It was the smile of the new Sophia, a cold, distant smile that held a secret. "I couldn't miss tonight, could I?" I said. "After all, it's your big night." Just that moment, there was a commotion at the door of the hall. Ricardo, our fake investor, Señor Martinez, entered with two young and serious-looking assistants. At that moment, all eyes turned to them. Ricardo played his role so well that for a moment, even I could believe he was a truly rich and powerful businessman. He walked confidently over to Javier and Valentina. "Javier, my son, Valentina, my lady, the night is just beginning," he roared cheerfully. He shook their hands and kissed Valentina's hand like a gentleman. At that moment, I saw the pride, the look of triumph on my son and daughter-in-law's faces. "This is it," they were thinking. "We did it. Thanks to these men, we are escaping this boring, ordinary life and stepping into the glittering world where we belong." Señor Martinez, or Ricardo, turned to me. He had a professional smile on his face, but his eyes said, "Everything is fine, Sophia. Relax. And this must be our guest of honor, the cornerstone of the family, Mrs. Sophia. Without a selfless mother like you, a determined young man like Javier could never have been raised." It was clear from Valentina's face that she didn't appreciate this compliment, but she didn't let it show. The evening continued with fake compliments, champagne glasses, and meaningless chatter. I, meanwhile, continued to play my part. I was playing the role of the old mother who didn't belong in this world of luxury, sitting in a corner chair, watching everything with timid and bewildered eyes. Javier came over to me a few times. "Look, Mom," he whispered. "See? I told you. We'll all be very comfortable now. You too. You won't be tired anymore." I looked at him then and said to myself, "Yes, I won't be tired. Because tonight, I'm leaving all my burdens on your shoulders." And finally, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. The host of the evening came on stage and enthusiastically invited Señor Martinez to join him. Ricardo walked onto the stage to applause and took the microphone. "Distinguished guests, we are gathered here tonight not just for a business deal, but to celebrate a vision," he began. The room fell silent. "We are here to celebrate the importance of investing in the future, of tearing down the old and building the new, and most importantly, of the power of family ties." Throughout his speech, he showered Javier and Valentina with praise. He spoke of their courage and foresight. With each round of applause, Javier and Valentina's egos swelled a little more. Finally, Ricardo uttered those magical words. And now, to witness this historic moment, I invite the architects of this grand vision, dear Valentina and Javier Ramirez, and of course, the guardian of this legacy, their beloved mother, Sofia Ramirez, to the stage. All the spotlights turned on us. Javier took my arm and slowly led me onto the stage. At that moment, as I climbed those 1,000-pound stairs, my heart felt like it was about to burst, but my face wore only a weary smile. In the center of the stage stood an elegant table covered in velvet. On the table lay 2 luxury fountain pens and 2 stacks of prepared documents. Flashbulbs were popping in our faces, and the guests were applauding us. Javier and Valentina were at the peak of their lives. They were smiling and waving. Everything was just as they had imagined. Ricardo, aka Señor Martinez, picked up the first stack of documents. "First of all," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing throughout the hall, "this is a simple procedure. Mr. Javier, with this document, you declare that you are the sole authorized family representative for the sale of the property in question, and that you assume all responsibility for the sale." Javier took the document with the most confident smile of his life. He was so drunk with victory at that moment that he didn't even feel the need to read the text in front of him. He picked up the pen and, with great pride, signed his name, pressing down hard on each letter. At that moment, I saw Valentina's eyes sparkle, and she struggled to hold back tears of joy. Then Ricardo turned to me. He slowly pushed the second stack of documents, the actual sales contract, toward me. "And now, Mrs. Sophia, this is the final sales contract. With this signature, you will transfer your family's legacy to us, to be combined with our vision." All eyes were on me. Flashes were going off incessantly. Javier squeezed my hand and whispered, "Come on, Mom. Let's get this done." I took the pen. I felt the touch of that heavy, cold pen in my fingers. I brought the tip to the blank space where I would sign. 1 second, 2 seconds. There was a deep silence in the room. Everyone was waiting for me to make that final move, to sign. And then I slowly put the pen back on the table. The silence in the hall had now turned into a curious silence. The smile on Javier's face froze. "Mom?" he whispered anxiously. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. Without taking my eyes off the crowd, I leaned toward the microphone. My voice came out unexpectedly clear and strong in that huge hall. "Before I take this pen," I said, "I want to ask my son a question in front of everyone." The entire room was watching me, holding its breath. Javier's face had turned pale. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "This isn't the place," he hissed. I ignored him. I fixed my eyes directly on him. "Javier," I said, "do you remember when you were 12, I sold the silver necklace your father left me so you could go to a math competition?" Javier swallowed. "Mom, please." I continued, my voice as sharp as steel. "Well, when you were in college, do you remember that I took out a mortgage on your father's shop, which took me 5 years to pay off, to cover that huge debt you ran up because of your crooked friends?" The whispers in the room began to grow. The porcelain smile on Valentina's face cracked, replaced by a look of horror. "And most importantly," I said, my voice now trembling but with rage, "do you remember your father's old, leather-bound recipe book, Javier? That book with his handwriting on every page, his dreams. Did you know that your wife burned that book in the fireplace at home, turned it to ashes?" At that moment, a murmur broke out in the room. Javier tried to shout, "She's lying. She doesn't know what she's saying in her old age." "No, I'm not lying," I said, pulling a document out of my bag. "It wasn't a sales contract. It was the sole and only deed to that shop, issued in my name after his father's death. Do you know what the real problem is, son? You can't sell something you don't own." I held the deed up in the air, letting the flashes illuminate my name on the document. This shop is my husband's legacy, my 25 years of hard work, and it belongs solely and exclusively to me. That signature you just proudly put down, I said, pointing to the paper he had signed, is worthless. Valentina screamed, "No!" at that moment. But the real blow was yet to come. At that moment, attorney Guillermo Hernandez appeared from the edge of the stage and came over to me. He took the microphone from my hand. "Esteemed guests," he said in his deep, confident voice, "as my client Sofia Ramirez has stated, there has been an illegal attempt to sell property, and that document Mr. Javier Ramirez just signed. It was not a power of attorney." Guillermo paused for a moment, drawing everyone's attention in the room. "That document is a legally binding confession in which he admits to attempting to fraudulently sell a property belonging to his mother by accusing her of being mentally unstable and pressuring her." At that moment, all hell broke loose. The flashes now exploded like weapons on Javier and Valentina's collapsed, incredulous faces. Valentina's eyes darkened and she collapsed where she stood. Javier, as if confronted by his father's ghost, stared with a pale face, first at me, then at Guillermo, then at the paper he had signed. At that moment, on that stage, under the brightest lights, he knew his life was over. Instead of applause, there were whispers full of shock and ridicule. Instead of victory, there was public humiliation he would never be able to shake off. As for me, I turned my back. I didn't look at my crying bride or my frozen son for even a moment. I took Guillermo's arm and, with my head held high, descended from that stage, that fake life, that dark past. As I walked, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders, my soul finally free. What happened after that night was like a small article on the third page of a newspaper, quick and clear. The fake investment deal had evaporated, of course. Javier and Valentina's names began to be referred to as fraudsters and scammers throughout Mexico City's high society. Everyone they had borrowed money from came knocking on their door, demanding their money back. That rented luxury car, that expensive house, everything was taken away from them. Valentina couldn't bear the misery and shame. A few weeks later, I heard she had left Javier and their unborn child and gone to another city in pursuit of a wealthy lover. As for Javier, he was completely broken. He was left alone, in debt, and with his pride in tatters. He called me several times, crying, apologizing. But I didn't answer those calls, because forgiving was the old Sofia's job. And that woman was gone. Her fate was no longer my concern. She was living with the consequences of her own choices. What did I do? The first thing I did after leaving the hotel that night was to return to San Antonio and sell that shop. But not for nothing, as they wanted. I sold it to a real investor for its true value. That shop was no longer a refuge for me, but a prison full of memories. And I needed freedom. A year has passed, my dear. Now I'm telling you these lines not from that old, dark shop, but from a completely different place. I bought a small house in a quieter neighborhood of the city, with begonias blooming in the garden and sunlight streaming through the windows. And I turned the biggest room in the house into a kitchen to make my dream come true. This is not a shop. This is a school. Its name is Sofia's Hands. Here, I teach young women who have struggled in life like me, who have no profession, everything I learned from Ricardo and my mother, all those recipes, all those secrets. I teach them not only how to cook, but also how to stand on their own 2 feet, how to protect their dignity, how to build their own lives without needing anyone else. Right now, 18-year-old Maria is standing in front of me. She can't seem to knead the dough properly. She keeps getting lost in the flour. I go over to her. I place my hands on top of hers. "Look," I say softly. "Don't be rough. Dough is like life. You have to feel it. You have to understand when it wants to rest, when it needs attention. If you give it your love, it will give you the most beautiful bread. Maria lifts her head and smiles at me. In that moment, I see my own reflection from years ago in her eyes. That hopeful young girl, clinging to life. Our hands together, giving life to that dough, the sun streaming through the window, warms my face. Inside me, there is a peace, a calm I haven't felt in years. I'm no longer fighting the ghosts of the past. I am no longer burning with the cold fire of revenge. I am simply living in the moment. And in that moment, I realize that the most beautiful recipes, the most delicious dishes, are not just those written in a notebook. They are those reborn from their ashes, kneaded anew with love and hope, just like life itself.